Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam, and I'll be your host today on Encounter. I'm the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. When I retired, and it's been a decade almost, besides playing with model trains, I was asked to write a chapter of a book a Cornell professor was editing, a book called Adequate Food for All. And my chapter was to be on religion and faith and food in culture. I'm looking for the title of the chapter. You'd think it would turn right to it. There it is. The role of religion, spirituality, and faith in food choices. I didn't really know very much about the topic. It wasn't my field before, but I felt honored to be invited to write the chapter. So I got my library card for Binghamton University's library and Cornell University's library, did the research, turned the thing in. Compared to the rest of the book, mine is really lightweight. But the rest of the book, called Adequate Food for All, Culture, Science, and Technology Food in the 21st Century, is a college text, which I couldn't afford to buy, but I got a free copy because I wrote it. What I learned about was that we have to pay attention to the food that we eat, where it's available, where it's come from, and when we say grace, to be as specific as possible as we say that prayer of blessing for the food that we have. And then eventually, of course, I've become a part of the Broome County Council of Churches in this program, and I'm learning so much more about the need for feeding our neighbors, the Chow program and some of the other things going on in the Broome County Council of Churches. So today's guest, sitting in that chair over there for a change, is Joe Sellepack, the Executive Director for about a third of your life maybe at the Broome County Council of Churches. What's going on these days in the council and some of the programs involved, especially with feeding the hungry?
Well, we've been, as you're well aware, I mean, we've been feeding people for over 40 years through our Chow program.
Yeah.
Community Hunger Outreach Warehouse started off as COW, which was the Christian Outreach Warehouse, and they thought, well, Christian was just way too narrow, and they didn't want to have a cow, so they thought, let's make it into a community-wide hunger outreach warehouse. Right. And so this is where Chow came from. And we started we started off distributing about 30,000 pounds of food through Chow. And this year we've already distributed over 1 million pounds. Man. And we will break the 2 million pound barrier again this year, which is we broke it last year at 2.1, will probably be about 2.2, 2.3 this year.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we, in the previous year, had gone through a huge renovation to the warehouse where we put in new refrigerators and freezers so that we could get more of the perishable food into there that people really need. It's healthy food, it's food that's not processed, it's fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy, and then meat, and then also allowing for some frozen food. So we doubled our refrigerator freezer capacity, and then quickly filled it. It was interesting because we were talking about it before it actually started. We said, that they tell us it's gonna, you build it, it will come, and we were going ha ha ha, right. Like thinking it was a joke, but it really did happen.
Yeah.
So as soon as we built it, we got a truck too that had a higher. The other trucks that we had, the ones that had like the cornucopia on them, they all have cornucopias on them, but the ones that were the big calling card for Chow or from Broome Bounty, they were lower decked trucks, and so we got a higher decked truck that could back all the way up to a loading dock.
Loading dock. Yeah.
And then you could drive a forklift out of the warehouse onto the back of the truck,
Right.
and that meant that they didn't have to unpack it and repack it and lower it and do all kinds of stuff to it. And so as a result of that, we doubled our donations too. So this was a good last year and a half has been really good as far as getting recovered food and being able to give that food away to people who really could use it.
Yeah. Has it been a year since? Because I remember going to the open house for that.
Yeah. It's been over. That happened. The open house was last June.
Yep.
So we had already had the refrigerator freezer unit and the truck for a couple of months before that happened. So it's
and
been,
one cool forklift.
Yeah, it's a great forklift.
Yeah.
I never thought in seminary that I'd be talking about forklifts, and forklifts would get me all jazzed up.
That's
they
right.
do.
These are not the things that you find in seminary
They
class.
don't at all. Never thought a big level truck either, or refrigerator freezer unit, and all that kind of stuff were part of, like, thinking about the title of your chapter, thinking about it as being part of my faith.
Yeah. Well, and you said you have one of these books, the Food and Faith book, which I brought along with Wendell Berry, Thomas More, and others, Food and Faith, Justice, Joy, and Daily Bread.
Yeah.
It's an excellent book. It's still available from Morehouse, I guess. And then the other book I brought along was called Food for Life, The Spirituality and Ethics of Eating. And again, in seminary, we didn't deal with these things.
No.
The spirituality of eating, or the ethics of food. These are things that
What's interesting, though, is that the Mennonites did. So if you go back to some of their books, one of them is called Extending the Table. It's a cookbook, but it's about food and faith. And then there was another book that was put out about simple eating, simple living, that the Mennonites did. This was back in probably in the 70s.
Right.
Really, really good book. Living More with Less was the name of the book, but really, really centered on the idea that spirituality and food, and how food is produced, how food is consumed, and our relationship to food is a very spiritual, and you can imagine, Mennonites being who they are, this was very important to them. And so the Brethren Church were right up that same alley. They were doing a lot of work with that, and as were other Anabaptists. So if you extend your repertoire a little bit more, you find that a lot of those people, even those people that are in there, are drawing on those resources.
Yes. Well, and I noticed the book called Food for Life is by a guy that was 2 years ahead of me at Union Seminary in Richmond, Shannon Jung, and it's a hard J. Shannon went into rural ministry.
Right.
I don't think he thought very much about food when we were in seminary, except where the refectory was.
Right.
But you go into the rural areas where the food is being produced. Now you understand how the food comes to be, the work, the labor, the stewardship, the risk, and you begin to take a little bit more cognizance of where the food comes from that we so often take for granted.
Exactly.
It's a substance sitting on a plate, sometimes very nicely presented, but we take it for granted.
Well, and going along those lines, Faith in Action volunteers we just got awarded through the United Way another grant for our Chop and Chat program, which is a way of us thinking about how the communal aspect of food.
Yeah.
So
the Chop and Chat.
Chop and Chat.
Tell me
so
what, I know
so
what it is.
what we do is we go into like a senior living apartment building.
Yeah.
We go into their like their community room, and we bring in recipes. And so they then have a recipe that they're working on, and they get to chop up the food, which is where the chop comes from.
Right.
We bring in the vegetables and the meats and other kinds of things that they would need to chop in order to make the recipe. Then they take all the things that they've chopped, they put it back into the refrigerator at home, and then they have a crock pot that comes through that, and then they can put it into the crock pot and be able to eat it that way. So
what a brilliant idea.
It's a really, really neat little idea, and it's just meant to help people especially people who are living in isolation, find the communal nature of food, because community is part of food.
Yes.
All the literature that you've been talking about would point to the fact that from the producer of the food, or the grower of the food, to the trucker who takes the food, to the distribution center, to the shopping market, to your table. That line is full of people, full of a community, and that community comes around food.
Yeah.
And food is food, because of that communal nature, comes from the work of humans, but it also comes from the divine. The divine is very much a part of that whole system. And so when we think of a grapefruit that comes on your table, you have to hear the story of the grapefruit. The grapefruit is more than just a grapefruit. Apples are more than just apples. Yeah. They have a full community that's part of that apple and producing it. And when you give thanks for that apple, or you give thanks for that grapefruit, you should be giving thanks for the entire community that came around that to provide that beautiful piece of fruit or produce on your table.
And it's quite a list, from the person who picked the apple off, who planted the tree, who picked the apple, who processed it in whatever way, and then the trucker who brought it to the store, and the list goes on. I'm going to take a little leap here from looking at this sense of fellowship and community around food. When we were in a church in rural Vermont, first of all, we found ourselves amidst small family farms,
Right.
primarily dairy farms, and we had a number of people in our church who were living, of course, when you live rurally and you live by yourself, widowed, for example, you're distant from your neighbors. So my wife said, we should have people in every once in a while to the manse, and we'll have a soup group. And so we'll make homemade soup, and we'll make homemade bread, and we'll just have whoever wants to come. And we would have 8, 10 people, 12 or so, mostly women, but a couple of men would come. So that created community around the table, and it was homemade. Everything was homemade, and we shared our gifts with one another. Sometimes we would make the soup. Well, not we. Joan would make the soup, and then somebody else might. So that's the rural section. But let's talk now. Let's move to the urban areas. Let's talk about Binghamton. Right. And what are some of the food issues there that the council is striving to? Anything new going on?
Well, a lot of people have probably seen our chow bus. The chow bus is another calling card. So if you go down to the library, that's one of our stops for the chow bus, where we bring the bus in. We set up a mobile produce market, as well as some grocery items that come off the chow bus. And so the chow bus has been a way of being able to go into food deserts and be able to supply people who live there with cheap or affordable, I would say affordable, right. It's not cheap, word. Affordable food that they can purchase using EBT, SNAP, WIC, and even cash. I mean, anybody can buy off of a chow bus. Right. So we've been doing this now for 3 or 4 years, and we were approached to begin thinking about the north side of Binghamton. North side of Binghamton is our largest food desert. So that means that the 12,400 people that live on the north side of Binghamton, are most of whom live more than a mile away from a grocery store. Right. And they also live within a demographic where it's at least 46% in poverty. So we were asked to start thinking about, well, how can we begin developing a grocery store that meets the needs of people on the north side? Yeah. Now, the problem with most models that approach the north side of Binghamton, they come from a very traditional model, which says that you have to make a profit on it. You also have to have a quality control, and there's a number of other things that go into making a grocery store work.
And if that were that easy, there would be a store there now.
Right. You'd have Save-A-Lot. You'd have Price Right has looked at it. So has Price Chopper, and Wegmans even looked at it at one point. Tops was talked about as well. And the thing about it, they were all looking at it. They said it just doesn't meet our needs on a number of levels. The experts that we talked to at Cornell who deal with grocery stores say that you have to have a population of 20,000 people, and there has to be a median demographic of $30,000 per household. And there's a number of things that go into making it grocery store effective within a certain area. None of those benchmarks are met on the north side of Binghamton. So even if you were to look at, like, there was a model being put out for a co-op, for instance, on the north side. Even co-ops generally will fail within that neighborhood because they don't necessarily take into account the demographics of the population that live on the north side. It's a transient neighborhood. First of all, it makes it difficult to have people there. There are a lot of psychological barriers in the north side of Binghamton. There's a number of things that make it kind of hard to do a normal grocery store there. Yeah. And so what we're doing is looking at developing a partnership with a group that has worked in a similar demographic in Utica. They're called Your Bargain Grocer, and they have done some amazing work at making affordable food. And like I just saw their most recent Facebook thing. They had 17 to 21 pound rib roasts for $50 a piece. and you had, if you were thinking about your family, 17 to 21 pounds of prime rib it's hard to even think about having prime rib whatsoever, because that's it's not something that you would normally be able to afford. Like, I think the going rate of prime rib is like $13 or $14 a pound. But you're getting 17 pounds of it for that cheap. Well, then maybe I can splurge, or I can have it butchered and I can bring it in with my friends. We can be able to split it up and do other kinds of things like that. One of my favorite though is that they've been able to get like a case of 10 rotisserie chickens for $10.
Oh my gosh! So
you're looking at a rotisserie chicken for $1, and you think about how far that can go. They and all of this food that they're able to get is basically food that would otherwise be refused by traditional grocery stores because it doesn't meet their quality standards. They're perfectly good food, but it's going to be a little misshapen,